okay, so does that mean that demotivated men are producing less testosterone?
We can say that the data show that repeated failures take testosterone levels lower than they would be otherwise.
Boosting testosterone levels is like unlocking a hidden power within you. It's not about being tough or trying to show off, but it's more about finding your own strength and resilience. These qualities, they make us feel confident, they make us feel brave. Testosterone isn't just a hormone that our body makes, it's like a signal, inviting us to work on ourselves, to make ourselves better, stronger, smarter. When we work on boosting our testosterone, we're also working to become better men. Men who are full of energy, men who have vitality, and men who are always ready to face new challenges. When we talk about increasing testosterone and unleashing masculine power, we're talking about waking up that strong, powerful part of ourselves that's often hidden away.
Dopamine is released, more adrenaline, aka epinephrine, can be released, and you can, this sort of upward spiral of energy and sort of success with the occasional drops, right? I mean, nobody succeeds in every task, right? Sometimes the phone rings or the doorbell rings and you fail. You fail to clean the cup. You come home, like, are you going to crash into a puddle of tears? No, you just clean it then and then put it away, right? Of course. But there's a slow system associated with achieving wins, even small wins. And that slow system is in the form of hormonal control that then translates to gene control. So two hormones in particular, testosterone and estrogen, which are present in both men and women, males and females, of course, are both when the dopamine system is activated. This has to do with the relationship between dopaminergic neurons and the pituitary gland, which releases gonadotropins and luteinizing hormones, which then stimulate the testes and the ovaries, et cetera, to release the so-called sex steroid hormones. The sex steroid hormones, testosterone and estrogen, of course, are involved in reproductive biology, but for motivational biology. And for the following reason: the steroid hormones are so-called lipophilic, and they can cross from the outside of a cell through the cell membrane to actually into the nucleus of a cell and control gene expression. So when we achieve wins repeatedly, and again, this doesn't matter if you're male or female, you achieve wins repeatedly, testosterone is the molecule that eventually accesses not just cells to control their immediate physiology, but goes into the nucleus of those cells and controls their gene expression. And what it translates...
So does that mean, does that mean that demotivated men are producing less testosterone?
We can say that the data show that repeated failures...
It's not about being aggressive or trying to control others. It's about using this energy and power to do good things and to achieve our goals. Having more testosterone can push you to do things that you never thought were possible, breaking down barriers in both physical and mental challenges. Unleashing the power of masculinity is like the rising of the sun. It's a force that inspires and motivates us to do and be better. Increasing your testosterone levels can have a very positive effect on every part of your life. From giving you more physical strength to making your mind sharper, it's like a natural energy boost, pushing you to reach higher and achieve more. But always remember, true strength is not about being the biggest or not about being the strongest. It's about being kind and respectful to others.
Take testosterone levels lower than they would be otherwise. That is not to say that people with low testosterone will always fail. Those with higher testosterone always win. But just to be clear, because you are correct, but people sometimes get hitched on this causal part. But indeed, one of the quickest ways to boost someone's testosterone is to have them achieve a win of some sort. Now, the win is translated...
Well, one of the things you do in behavior therapy constantly is you help people calibrate the zone of proximal development. And it's one that you can actually manage. And so if you see people who are entirely stymied, we're sort of back to the cup of coffee or the coffee cup example, you want to find something they can do locally this week that would constitute at least a micro win. And you just keep... And if you talk to someone, you say, well...
Masculinity ain't about how much you can lift, bro. How many fights you can win, bro. It's about the strength of your character. Boosting your testosterone levels is part of the journey. It's about feeling confident in yourself, achieving your personal best in all things, and being able to bounce back when things get tough, because they will get tough. The real power of masculinity is understanding and controlling this energy, and using it for good, to build things, to inspire others, to achieve your goals. boosting your testosterone is part of the journey to becoming a stronger, more balanced, and more powerful man.
Maybe that's because they're learning in the way that you described. Okay, so back to the gene regulation. It increases testosterone, the wins, and
Yeah, so testosterones are associated wins. Winners tend to be able to win more? There's some et cetera. But, if we want to bring this into the common world, a few years back when I started doing some public-facing education, I started getting a lot of questions, especially on YouTube, from young males about pornography and masturbation. And this becomes very relevant here. We have to remember that this dopaminergic system is generalizable to many different behaviors, right? Academic pursuits, sports pursuits, relationship pursuits. But fundamentally, it was, again, I wasn't a consultant at the design phase, but fundamentally it's tacked into the adaptive survival behaviors. And every species, including ours, has at least two major motivations, which is to protect its young and to make more of itself, to make more young at some level. One of the absolutely pathologic situations for any animal or human is to be able to access.
The process of boosting testosterone and unleashing your masculine power starts with the inside and it works its way out. It's about sparking that energy within you, an energy that can help improve your health, help give you more energy, and make your mind sharper. Being a man is about being strong, decisive, and focused. And the journey to boost your testosterone is part of becoming the best version of yourself. A man who is strong, full of life, and ready to face any challenge that comes his way.
Repeated dopamine surges without effort or any pursuit that's self-directed, or that's directed, I should say. So for instance, cocaine, a drug which potently increases dopamine, or methamphetamine, which adaptive action pursuit, except to acquire the drug and spend money on it.
No
sacrifice. So what ends up happening is the circuit that gets rewarded is only the drug-seeking behavior, and no other behavior will give the kind of potent dopamine release that cocaine or methamphetamine will, which is why they are so pernicious. Now, likewise,
Right.
I'm not...
Well, plus they have that powerful reinforcing effect, right? So not only do you get that kick, but what's reinforced by the dopamine release is the behaviors that were particularly right prior to the ingestion. And if all that is the drug-taking behavior, that's all that developes.
That's right.
You build that monster inside your head.
That's right.
So I can see where you're going on the pornography front.
Right. So I was starting to get a lot of questions. I was kind of surprised. I thought, well, I'm male and, maybe that's why they feel comfortable asking. But people were saying, we're asking about pornography, and they were asking, I realize we want to, I'll just be direct about it. They were asking whether or not masturbation was bad. They were asking whether or not, and here's my stance on this. I'm a biologist and a neuroscientist, not a psychologist. A couple of things happen. First of all, what's being reinforced? What's being reinforced is a high dopaminergic response to watching other people engage in sexual behavior, which is very different than being in a first-person sexual experience. Okay, so right there, that what's being reinforced is not actually any kind of improvement in communication skills. It's voyeurism. And as these questions started to come in more and more, I started to realize there was a lot of kind of undertones of people talking about fear of or experience with sexual dysfunction that clearly pornography can lead to. And here I'm specifically talking about males. I actually don't know the literature on females. So and then you start to think about, okay, what happens in the cascade or the arc of it's parasympathetically dominant, meaning if somebody is too stressed, they actually can't engage in sexual behavior. The arousal response doesn't occur. Associated with the so-called sympathetic nervous system, which has nothing to do with sympathy, it has everything to do with, it's a kind of a stress response. And then it reverses to a parasympathetic response. And a hormone called prolactin increases dramatically after ejaculation in males. What does that do? That blunts dopamine release and testosterone for a very long period of time, which makes sense if pair bonding and sort of, in our species anywhere, there's this idea that then other molecules would be exchanged with partners, pair bonding, potential for raising mates, etc. Without getting into a huge discussion about that, the point is this. Masturbation and pornography are potently tapping into the dopamine system and can undermine the very processes of what I consider healthy processes of finding a mate, dating, communication, eventually, if it's appropriate, sexual interaction, etc.
It's undermining.
So this is very interesting. The biology explains it as what's left there is a kind of an open loop, a kind of an emptiness, right? Because bonding with the self is a complicated notion. I mean, there's a healthy version of that, of course, loving oneself and self-referencing. And again, this is more far more your domain than mine in terms of what a healthy self-relation is. But in the absence of a real partner there, absence of real sexual partner, there's an open loop of neurochemicals, including oxytocin and prolactin. The dopamine, remember, dopamine goes up during pursuit, anticipation, then peaks and then crashes below baseline. We can think of this, if I were to kind of expand on it, would be, it's this kind of neurochemical, psychological equivalent of making your home environment filthy for a while, not actually putting you into this positive amplification of dopamine. So it depletes the dopamine system. And it's likewise in drugs of abuse and addiction, it eventually depletes the dopamine system. Initially, there's a huge dopamine surge with drugs of abuse like methamphetamine and cocaine. But over time, people are using more and more to achieve what is not such a great high. You even see this a little bit with kind of consumption of energy drinks. Like people are taking more and more chemicals within their energy drinks, and they're thinking about loud, fast music, energy drinks, this kind of stacking of dopaminergic tools. Now, that's not as pathologic. In fact, there are some energy drinks I'll occasionally drink, and I enjoy them. I don't think we need to be entirely afraid of pursuing or engaging in things that release dopamine. Obviously, healthy sexual behavior, food that we love, social engagement, all of these things can be dopaminergic. It's the big peaks in dopamine that are particularly dangerous for the human being.
Yeah, well, you could see that's a cardinal danger of, you can only get rats addicted to cocaine if they're isolated rats in a cage. Yeah, they won't bar press for cocaine in a natural environment, and it's because they have alternative sources of dopaminergic gratification.
Inject a question about weight training and hormones. You hear this all the time, that doing these big, heavy compound movements or resistance training increases androgens, things like testosterone, DHT, DHEA, and so forth. Does anyone know how that actually happens? Like, what is it about engaging motor neurons under heavy loads sends a signal to the endocrine system, hey, release testosterone? I've never actually been able to find that in a textbook.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the stress response, right? It's mechanical stress and it's metabolic stress. And these are, the downstream regulation of testosterone release at the gonads comes from many different areas.
From the work that you did as a PhD student and throughout your career, could you say that there are some general principles of training that favor testosterone production in terms of that somebody who's not an elite athlete could use, somebody who's already adapted to weight training somewhat, like they know the difference between a dumbbell and a barbell, and they know the various movements. They're not going to damage themselves. But a typical person who's trying to use weight training to build or maintain muscle, lose body fat, so body recomposition, or stay strong and healthy for sport of a different kind.
If you look at many of the exercise interventions that we use to try and investigate and interrogate testosterone,
6 by 10 meaning?
6 sets of 10 repetitions, which is it's quite a large, 60 repetitions is quite a large volume for a single exercise, and that was usually pitched at about 80% of a 1 repetition max intensity.
Okay, so 80% of the 1 rep max, six sets of 10 reps separated by rest of like
2 minutes.
2 minutes, which is actually pretty fast, at least to me.
Anytime
you see these 2 to 3 minutes, when you're actually watching the clock, those 2 minute rest periods go by pretty fast.
By the third, fourth set, you're dying for more. Yeah. And I think we formulated that kind of exercise protocol to really target the release of testosterone and try and drive up these anabolic environments to study the endocrine consequences. But I think that's the type of protocol that is most advantageous for driving anabolic environments.
And that was it for the workout?
Yeah, I mean, we would do that in a back squat. So, multi-joint, challenging exercise, multi-muscle, multi-joint, 80% load of your 1 repetition max, and then 6 by 10. We did play around with, your classic German volume type 10 by 10. The key to what we also did was we always adjusted the loads to make sure that it was 10 repetitions that were sustained. So if the load was too too high, and an athlete or a participant had to drop the weight on the 6th repetition, we would unload the bar and make sure they completed the 10 repetitions.
I see. And you could imagine just taking very long rest, keeping the session, being a big lazy bear in training. I sometimes do this. I tell myself I'm going to work out for 45 minutes and then 2 hours later I'm done. But not because I was huffing and puffing the whole time, but because I was training really slowly.
And I think that comes back to the volume conversation. 6 sets of 10 is driving up metabolic stimulus. If you're doing 10 sets of 6, you can probably take it to a higher intensity, but you're not going to get the same metabolic load. You're not going to get the same internal metabolic environment that drives the lactate release that they will then signal, further anabolic testosterone release because of the lactate in your body. That's a key consideration. The rest is often the consideration that's overlooked out there in general population and in many sporting environments. That the rest is, and yes, if you extend the volume, if you extend the duration of your rest periods, what you're ultimately doing is influencing that metabolic stimulus again. You're allowing the flushing of the body, the removal of waste products, lactate to be, removed from the body, and then the metabolic environment is reduced.
So if I understand correctly, you want to create a metabolic stress.
Absolutely.
So the way that I've been training, slow and lazy, is not necessarily the best way to go. I could in theory do a 45 or 60-minute session where I pack in more work per unit time. I'm not going to be able to, quote unquote, perform as well. I won't be able to lift as much. I'm going to have to unweight the bar between sets, or maybe even during sets if I have someone who could do that. But it sounds like that's the way to go. So it's got to be, the old adage of high intensity, short duration is probably the way to go.
Correct. And in layman's terms, if the same objective, the same training goal is just muscle tissue growth, and we're not talking about maximal strength or any of those type of parameters, we're just talking about growing muscle. If there's an athlete A and they do six sets of 10 with 2 minutes rest, and there's athlete B that does 6 sets of 10 with 3 minutes rest, athlete A will likely see the highest muscle gains. Muscle hypertrophy gains because of the metabolic stimulus that they're driving with the shorter rest periods.
Interesting. For all the years that I've spent exploring exercise science and trying to get this information from the internet and various places, that this is the first time it's ever been told to me clearly.